All right. Welcome to Be the Market Expert. And we're going to kick it off with Housing Wire. Not only are we kicking it off with Housing Wire, we're going to kick it off with Gary Keller. Now, the best part about Gary Keller being able to kick this off is that Gary Keller makes headlines when we are either around family reunion or mega agent camp now because he's not doing these road shows and touring and taking interviews. Like this is stuff that he says in an audience full of Keller Williams, and then it makes these national real estate publications. So um, here's the article. It says data, not doom. Gary Keller makes the case for housing optimism. All right, so check this out. He says Keller Williams forecasts 4.3 million home sales, 2.4 trillion in volume, and 5.9% mortgage rates for 2026. So this rolled out yesterday. And as we're going through and we're looking at this, as while the current housing market conditions may appear to be weakening, thanks to the large winter storm and economic uncertainty. I don't know what the economic uncertainty that we're referring to, unless it's tariffs and everyone's interpretation of what the tariffs are going to be doing or not doing. And is there refund checks and is there not refund checks? And what will the new 10% tariff, like, I don't know if this is what we're referring to. But the winter storm was a thing, right? Like we've talked about this on this call to where real estate was moving, it was moving, and then Florida got snow. And if Florida's getting snow, then things are getting a little bit weird out there. So it says, I think that for the first 6 months of this year, it's going to feel like it did last year. All right. So Gary Keller is saying, hey, nationwide. And remember, this is Gary Keller, and this is a nationwide conversation at this point. This is going to feel a lot like it did last year. He says, we think you're going to have a better year by the end of the year, so just keep at it. And we understand this, right? We just know that we need to be in emotional proximity to people. So when they're thinking about transacting, they are thinking about us. All right. So when we're going through, Gary Keller says, hey, you guys actually have to understand a lot of economic markets. Okay. So when we're talking about these economic markers and Gary Keller saying that, hey, you guys need to be aware of them, like that is one of the reasons why we are on this call and we are looking at any information that is newer and relevant so that we can be that real estate economist of choice. He says, if we don't understand the economy, if we don't understand the numbers, we're missing a piece of the ability to consult and give people perspective. Guys, that is the only reason why we do what we do on this call, right? We are looking at the numbers so that when we are having a conversation, we can say that, hey, we saw this and this is my opinion. He says, I believe in every consumer that actually understood what we understand, the consumer confidence index wouldn't be as low as it is. So here's what he says. Keller and his team are anticipating 4.3 million home sales, which would be up from 4.1 million annual rate for the last 3 years. All right. So Gary Keller saying that, hey, what we are going to see is we are going to see things picking up. He says, because if we look at historical trends, this typically happens after 3 consecutive years of slow home sales. All right, cool. So Gary Keller's going back in the past. He's looking at all the data and he's saying, hey, every time that we see these slower trends where it's kind of flatlining a little bit, after 3 years, we see a spike. So Gary Keller's looking at the data and he's saying, hey, data, crystal ball, we're going to have better home sales. All right. So we're looking at this. He says also, in addition, he's saying that we actually believe that home price appreciation will continue. Yeah, it's going to be slower. It will be a slower pace than what it was with what it did over the COVID-19 pandemic. All right. So global pandemic, where we saw huge appreciation, right? And we'll look at that data tomorrow. But he says, however, even with a slower pace of appreciation, nationwide home prices will remain roughly 7.4% above the 4% appreciation. All right. So what we're saying is, hey, it has slowed down. And so what we would have historically seen since the 1990s is 4% appreciation year over year over year. What happened? Global pandemic, 2020, interest rates, pretty much free money after the global pandemic. What happened? Well, I guess it's still the global pandemic, but free money. What happened was people were going out, they were spending money, and the appreciation skyrocketed. All right, lower levels of inventory, free money. We saw the appreciation go big. And he's saying, well, hey, With that, what we've seen is since we increase this line so significantly over where it has been, if we were just follow the trend because of this anomaly that has popped in, global pandemic, that what we're going to see going forward is it's going to still just kind of drop. It's going to teeter down a little bit more and more and more, but we're still above the 4% average annual home price appreciation. And guys, like, I think that's a very good conversation to have, right? We're having the conversation with our people, and our people are saying, well, hey, I'm hearing the sky's falling. I'm hearing that home prices are crashing, Airbnb bust, silver tsunami, all these things that are going on. And it's like, well, hey, here's the deal. We can say that all these things are, happening or potentially going to happen or whatever. We don't believe that. And if we were to still look at the trend line, we're still above the trend line. So, Mr. and Mrs. Consumer, what are you seeing out there that's showing anything different than what we're looking at? He says these numbers, according to Keller, will accumulate in the industry as a whole during this projected $2.4 trillion in sales volume in 2026, the third best year on record. All right, so let's just look at this. Like I do want to talk about this. So he's saying, hey, this is the third best year on record at $2.4 trillion. Why? Well, guys, because again, home prices are going up. Home prices are going up. Yeah, the appreciation isn't skyrocketing, right? That's what they're saying. Like, hey, we're not going to see probably 4% appreciation, but we're still seeing appreciation. And so what does that mean? Well, that means that every home that we're selling is probably going to be more expensive than what it was last year, and definitely more expensive than it was probably the last time that it sold. So we're talking about the third best year on record, which I think is a very interesting way to preface a lot of these things. Where say, hey, you know what? We're actually going to potentially see a projected $2.4 trillion in sales volume this year, which would honestly be the third best year on record for home sales. Now, again, I think that's a very interesting way of putting this just because of what it really is entailing. But I think it's a good number to pull out of your pocket. He says, however, inventory is expected to remain constrained. Guys, and this is the real reason why we're seeing home prices not come to a halt. There's not enough inventory. And I get it. We're seeing homes that are sitting on the market for 6 months. And breathe through this if this is one of your homes. It's probably not worth what it's on the market for. All right. Like that's just what we're dealing with at this point. So, but what we do know is that buyers are coming on the market. They're coming online every single day. When we look at this and we talk about the first time home buyer being 40 years old, leaving mom and dad's basement, avocado toast in hand, right? What we're also seeing is they're also putting 10% down. All right. So 10% down in our area, what we have is a $700,000 price point if you're talking about Jefferson County. $700,000 price point, that's $70,000 down for a 40-year-old. And that is what's taking them so long. They're saving 10%. And guys, 10% isn't what's nutty about any of this. What we've seen throughout the years, throughout the decades, is it's always about 10%, right? We do see some 20, we do see some threes, and we see everything in between. But yet 10% is our historical line. We just know that home prices have gone up. It's taking people longer to afford. And this is why we're seeing multiple offer situations after a home's been sitting on the market for 6 months. All right. So when we are looking at this, he says inventory is expected to remain constrained. 5.9 transaction sides per agent in 2026. And this looks like very similar to some of the things that I've seen on NAR. I'm also going to show this slide tomorrow, guys. We have a lot of slides to go over tomorrow. So I'm just going to say, hey, join Team Rally tomorrow. We're going to look at some data. And below the historic of 9.5 slides per agent. All right, cool. So we're looking at this thing and he's saying, hey, look, on average, agents are going to do about 6 deals a year this year. And this has dropped from about 10. All right, so this is what we're looking at. He goes, and still, what we're going to see is an average of $3 million in volume. And guys, that's what's kind of interesting about all this, especially all of us, because we live in Colorado, right? We are blessed in the sense that where we have a price point to where it's a lot easier to help consumers and less consumers and still be able to have a lifestyle, right? And so when we look at this, That's what's interesting when we look and we see that you guys are living as real estate agents in the third best year on record for sales volume projected. Because with that, that means that when you look at whatever your commission rate is and you multiply that against your volume, your commission check is still increasing, right? You can still do less deals and you're still not in a very bad position. So this means that each transaction is more important than ever. All right. That's what Jason Abrams is going through. He says, so we can't whine. All right. Gary says, don't whine. The market is good. So he says, perhaps one of the best pieces of news is consumers in 2026 is the lower mortgage rates. All right. Gary and the team are going through and they're saying, hey, we think we're going to average about 5.9 this year after two more Fed Reserve rate cuts this year. All right. So when we look at this, guys, we can see that as it's going through, it says these projected mortgage rates are still below the historic 7.72. And that's what's very interesting. We just have people living in 2021, right? We have all these consumers living in 2021 saying, hey, 3% interest rates. But the historic average is 7.72. And we're going back into a world where we're sub 6%, guys. This is good news. He said, if you got into the business in the last 12 to 13 years, you don't even know what normal is. He says, if you look at the first 10 years of his career, interest rates were at 18%. He says, days on market were 10 months and there was 11 months of inventory. He says, the team also is going to say that 21% of all existing homeowners that have a mortgage, all right, these aren't cash. These are 21% of all existing homeowners that have a mortgage are at 6% or higher. Remember, we were talking about the golden handcuffs. No one's moving because of 3% interest rates. And yet we're saying that 21% of the population that actually has a mortgage is at 6% or higher at this point. Guys, and that number is only going to increase, all right? Because we know that we are in an industry where it's around life events. Life events is what is going on in people's worlds to where they are moving, right? We know what this says. This represents what could be the great unlock. You have all of these folks that wouldn't move because rates were so low, or they became accidental landlords. And as this number continues to grow, people aren't necessarily tied to their mortgages because they're not the norm anymore. So as we're going through, he says more inventory could of course help improve affordability. And we understand this. More homes coming on the market means that there's more competition, and the only way to make my home look better than the other homes that I'm competing against is to either improve it or to drop the price. And we understand this. All right, so we're going through, and he says data shows that in 2025, on average, 32% of homeowners' income went towards the principal and interest on their mortgage, which was down from 34% in 2023 and 49% in 1981. Fun fact, I wasn't born yet. But as we're going through and we are looking at this data, guys, this is very, very important. We're going to be able to go through and have these conversations with our people. All right. So we're going to look at a lot of this information tomorrow at the team meeting. They have very beautiful slides that we can look at historic data. I anticipate a lot of phones going up and pictures being taken, but let's move on to the next slide. As I pull this up to have just a quick conversation with it, and I don't necessarily think that we need to harp on this too much, because I think that every agent inside of these four walls understands that we need to be having the right conversations with our consumers. And this says inflated agent fees cost consumers thousands. Report claims. All right, so this isn't too far off of when a previous administration said that your fees are junk fees, right? Hey, real estate agents, your fees are junk fees and you are costing the American people. It says standard commission practices harm consumers and failed to reward good agents or discourage bad ones, according to a new report from the Consumer Policy Center. Well, firstly, what we all understand on this call is there's no such thing as a standard commission. There is no such thing as a standard commission. Now, this is the beautiful thing about this thing is that you guys know what your services are. You know how you go up and show up for your consumers, and you have the ability as a small business owner to set your prices. in the form of a commission. So it goes through, and let's just read the key points. It says, despite industry rule changes, commission rates and practices have remained largely unchanged. Okay, well, let's look at this. So if we were to look at this as a whole, what we do know is that the nation has removed blanket offers of compensation. All right, so blanket offers of compensation are no longer an industry norm to where we're not saying, hey, if you bring the buyer, seller is willing to pay X%. That is now gone nationwide. Also across the nation, in 49 states outside of Colorado, which is where we live, every other state has to go through and they have to sign what I'm going to call a touring agreement. And this touring agreement says, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, if I'm the procuring cause of one of these homes, you will owe me, in fact, a commission. 49 other states, yet this key point says commission rates and practices have remained largely unchanged. And I would say commission rates, okay, so let's talk about the commission rates. So you're going through and let's talk about our contract. Our contract in the exclusive right to buy says, hey, if I help you find your home, I would be entitled to X. Do you agree, Mr. and Mrs. Homebuyer? And guess what? They say, yes, absolutely. You would be worth that. And not only that, but inside of the language, it says that they're responsible for paying you. Okay, so your consumers are signing a document that says that you are worth X, and so much so that they are willing to pay you. And depending on which line you choose, there's a line item that says that they give you permission to approach the seller in the CBS, the contract to buy and sell, to ask for the commission. And if not, and if they won't pay you, then the buyer will pay you. So when I look at this and I say, okay, well, the practices have absolutely changed. There's no blanket offer of compensation. And there's also new practices in place. Now, we were having this conversation on Coffee Talk the other day with, hey guys, are you guys getting blanket offers where the agent is negotiating directly with your seller and no longer calling you? And guess what? I think that's the best practice. I do believe personally that the best practice is that you have the conversation with your consumer, your buyer. Your buyer says, hey, I think you're worth X, and I give you permission to enter into the contract to buy and sell and negotiate your compensation. So I do not have to front the full burden, even though I am willing to. And then you put it into the contract to buy and sell, you submit it over, and the seller now gets to make the decision. And guys, I believe that that is the right way to do things. And so I wholeheartedly disagree that practices have remained largely unchanged that this paper suggests. It says the author asserts that buyers and sellers are grossly overpaying for agent services due to lack of price competition and efforts to sabotage brokers offering lower prices. What are the efforts? Right. If I look at this, I'm like, well, what are the efforts? There's no longer blanket offers of compensation. The buyers are going into this thing eyes wide open because it says that they are absolutely 100% responsible for paying us. Everyone understands that if you go through and say, don't worry, I'm going to get the seller to pay, that is absolutely false information and illegal. So what are people doing to sabotage this? Now, again, what we really see, because here's the deal, guys, what do we understand? On this call, what we understand is that the seller is selling their home. And in the Jefferson County area, this is around $700,000. And if they bought it in the 1990s on a 30-year mortgage, that means if they didn't do any refinancing, they didn't do anything to pull money out or to change their financing terms, they have equity, significant amount of equity. This wasn't an investment for them, most likely. This was a place to potentially raise children, to grow old together, to meet a job requirement in another state. So this is where they moved, right? This was not an investment. Then they moved into the home, life event. Now they're going to sell. Okay, cool. They're sitting on a couple $100,000 in equity in this 1990s scenario. Then you have a buyer. Who's the first time home buyers? 40-year-old. How much money can they afford to put down? What we're seeing right now, 10%. 10% of 700,000, 70K. Guys, that's a lot of money for them. So what do we know? Well, they want to buy the house, and now there are financial constraints. They are giving their agents permission to enter into the contract to buy and sell and see what the seller, who is getting more cash out of the deal, to see if the seller would be willing to pay their agent's compensation. Or else what? Well, if they're not willing to, and we're talking about this 10%, some of that money is going to have to go towards paying their agent, which is going to dwarf their purchase price. And guys, if we're able to have these conversations intelligently, then this goes away. All right. But what we have to keep in mind is this is multiple years of this commission lawsuit, and we have to be comfortable having these conversations. We are not allowed to mislead the public and thinking that the listing aid or the listing side of things is going to pay our compensation, but yet there is a mechanism for us to at least ask. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you are still going to be on the hook to pay my compensation. And yet, if we check this box, you are giving me permission to at least enter into conversations with the other side to see what happens. It says, but agent pay is not closely tied to quality. Now, I do agree with this. This is the one bullet point that I do agree with, right? This is saying, and this is why you see a lot of, I'm going to say hate. You do see a lot of hate on social media, right? Where they're talking about how I sold my house without a real estate agent because real estate agents suck. And you know what? They probably did deal with a sucky real estate agent, right? I'm not going to, right? When we talk about this, we talk about the barrier to entry. The barrier to entry is not high. 168 hours, $1,000, right? You have a real estate license. Like it's not huge. And yet you get to decide on the level of service that you are going to bring to your consumers. And that's what we need to do. We need to elevate the service, right? What are we doing to make sure that we're going out to be the real estate economist of choice? That we're going through and being the most educated real estate agents that we possibly can, to go have the systems, the models, the tools to make sure that our consumers feel good with the level of service that we are offering. When we look at this and we talk about the barrier to entry and we talk about any other career, because yes, this is a career. And in theory, you could get this licensing going in a month, where most other careers take 4 years of education. These are the things that we're going to do to where we're going to go through, and we need to be the best version of a real estate agent that we could possibly be. So yes, 2 of these points I think are stupid. And yet I do agree with the first one. If we're not going to go elevate the services, then we are no better. And yes, then they are saying, well, hey, not all real estate agents are evenly yoked. And why are we paying them all the same according to this report? Let's shift it though. I do want to talk about this as well. We're not going to live a whole lot in this. But as we look at this, it says White House sets 100 home ownership cutoff and proposed institutional home buying ban. All right, so cool. Back in January, last month at this point, we saw that the administration says we are going to ban institutional investors from buying houses. And everyone said, what in the world is an institutional investor? No one knew, right? Like there was like guesses, like people were like looking through stuff and trying to figure out like actually what was an institutional investor. And everyone was just like, BlackRock, right? Like that was the conversation. Everyone was just like BlackRock. It was like, okay, cool. So like it's just them. Or are we talking about mom and pops that own 20 doors? Are we talking about single family? Are we talking about multi-living? Like what are we talking about? And there was a lot of conversation around it. Well, they came through on the 19th. All right. So last week, they came through and they actually said, hey, we're actually going to call these large investors anyone owning 100 or more homes, more specifically single family homes. All right. So now they have actually drawn up this avatar of what a large scale investor looks like. So this isn't your mom and pops that own multiple doors, which we understand is the largest group of investors, right? Yes, there is a handful or maybe 2 handfuls of these large investors that own multiple doors, right? And some of them have faces and we can actually picture their logos. But yet a lot of these investors, again, are mom and pops. These aren't going after the apartment complexes. These aren't going after the quads or the duplexes. What this is truly going after is your single family houses. And I remember back in 2021, I actually read this article, and I can't remember the company's name, but it was a Canadian based company, which makes it even better. And this Canadian based company actually came through, and their CEO said something along the lines of, we are buying up all of these single family homes in the Sunbelt states because we know that millennial buyers, they don't want to own a house. They just want to be able to live in a pretty home. And you're like, huh? Where did this study take place? Right. And so what this is going to do is this is going to slow some of the stuff down. I'm not opposed to this. Now, I think this is going to be done with a pen, and it could be done, it can be undone with a pen. I think that's what this is really going to do. I don't know if this is really going to go through the Senate and Congress at this point, but we'll see. And here you go. So share of US single family homes purchased in a given quarter. And so you guys can see this as we're looking through. These are large investors. This is that 100 plus that have gone through, and you guys can see it's kind of slowed down a lot, right? To where we were seeing that they were going through and they were purchasing a lot of real estate past the pandemic. And then since then, they've actually slowed down. And so I don't know what this is really going to do, but what we do know is that we're going to see more and more conversations around housing affordability, because those are the conversations that everyone can get behind right now. All right. You are going to see political leaders, whether it is at a local level or, in the Senate, in the Congress, in the White House. Everyone's going to be leaning into this conversation. Now, I don't truly know what big impacts they're going to have, but what we understand is that we will never be able to outbuild out of this, right? We will never be able to build enough homes. Lennar, Century, insert whatever here, will never, ever, ever build enough homes to where we have enough homes for every American that wants a home. Which we understood that if they were to do that, it would drive home prices way, way, way down. And guess what? The builders don't want that. They're a for-profit company. This is not the March of Dimes. All right. So as we're going through and we're looking at these things, the builders are not going to just build a surplus of real estate so that every family can have a home, because they want a profit. And you do not control profit margins by oversaturating the market to give everyone what they want, supply and demand. So as we're going through here, this is one of the ways that they're saying, well, okay, well, how can we control at least the supply that is out there if we are not going to build? Well, we're going to put some limitations on the people that are actually building, that are not using them for residents, for a end user. All right. Let's shift over and let's talk about Logan. All right. Logan Motoshami last week. This is Friday. We're talking about last week's data, rear view facing data. It says weekly pending home sales back to year over year growth as we head into the spring. Okay. What does this headline say? The iguanas have thawed out in Florida. All right. So as we're going through and we're looking at this, it says weekly pending home sales, which have shown year over year growth up until the late January snowstorm, got back on track with year over year growth last year. Cool, guys. That's a headline. One thing to remember about our weekly pending sales data is it takes about 30 to 60 days to be reflected in the existing home sales data. So not only did the snowstorm delay people from their listing homes and looking at other homes, but some closings were impacted as well. All right. Yeah, that makes sense. We live in Colorado. We understand that our consumers don't want to be walking out in a snowstorm. I can guarantee you people in Florida did not want to be walking around in the snow either. So as we look over this, look at weekly pending sales. Here we are, we're in the blue. So if we look at this in our visual aid here, we are right on track. We did dip a little bit lower with that snowstorm, but now we're right back in track with 2024, 25. So we feel good about that. Purchase mortgage application data. All right, guys, so we can actually see here, like we got 2025, here's your 2026. We can see the seasonality. Seasonality showed up on both of these weeks, week over week, month over month, if we were to really look at this. No need for concern, right? As we're looking at this data, what this data is saying to me is there's still more purchase application data. There's still more consumers that are raising their hand that are saying, hey, I am interested in figuring out what I qualify for. So what we do know that is mixed into this as well is refinances. There are people that have 8% interest rates, guys. And while that hurts my stomach to think about, there are people that have these interest rates that are going through and they are refinancing. So we are seeing some of that mixed into this data. But what we are also seeing is that 40-year-old that has finally saved up some money and they're saying, hey, it is time for me to go buy a house. And guys, that is exciting. So yes, we can look at this and we can say, oh man, it dipped from the height of this year. But yet what we're still seeing is year over year data. We are still getting more and more consumers raising their hand. We're not going to talk about the 10-year yield. We're not going to talk about the treasury, but let's look at national single family inventory. Guys, here we are. This is good stuff, right? We're looking at 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, and 2026. We have more inventory coming online. No more golden handcuffs. People, life event are happening. That's what's interesting about our industry. We are a life event driven industry. People buy and sell houses because something is happening in their world. Yeah, some people just get tired of their home and they want to move. They want to change of scenery. And we were absolutely seeing that in 2021, right? 2021, we were seeing people literally move across the street because they wanted a different view out of their window. Like that was real. And yet that slowed down with the cost of money going up. So as we're going through and we're looking at this, guys, this is good news. This is what slows down the rapid increase in home appreciation. Because here's the deal. Yes, homes appreciating and people get to sell their homes and they're making more money than what they bought. And we absolutely want that. But yet, if it increases too much, guess what? They're still going to get caught on the buy side as well, right? Because what we do know is most sellers, historically speaking, become buyers. So if I am buying at an elevated price, or if I'm selling at an elevated price, I'm still buying at an elevated price. We want people to make money on the sale of their home. Absolutely. We want this to be not only a hedge against inflation with our fixed rate mortgage over 30 years, but yet what we also want to see is them being able to actually access some of that money and be able to use it for some other stuff. The inventory is going to stabilize it to where we're not seeing these crazy pops in the appreciation. Here's your national single family new listings. We can see that we're hedging up a little bit more still in the winter, everyone. Now it's been a different winter, at least here in Colorado, where we haven't seen a lot of snow. And I just can't wait for the spring and the summer to come through and we get rain and stuff. And people are telling me that we needed the moisture. So I feel those conversations coming. But yet, as we look through and we're going in this information, guys, more inventory coming online. This is good. Life events are happening. People are listing their homes. Price cut percentages. Guys, check this out. This is what's also very interesting. We were looking at 33%, right? That's the historical information where we would look at this and say all homes, at least 1/3 of them, take a price cut every year. Guys, we're seeing a little bit of a dip. Okay, so we're seeing more inventory, we're seeing better interest rates, and we're seeing less price cuts. And I don't know if you guys are seeing this as well, but we're also seeing homes that are sitting on the market taking multiple offers. So something's happening that we really can't necessarily pinpoint. But yet, as we look at this, as more homes are coming on, we're actually seeing less homes take their price cuts as well. Well, also what we know is that most of these sellers that do have some kind of life event that is having them sell their home, the balance sheets on their homes look really good, right? They're not in a place. Yeah, I get that there's some people that have some distressed homes. We're going to look at that tomorrow as well. Make sure you come to the team rally. And yet, not a lot of people are underwater. You know who is getting underwater? It is those younger buyers that went out and they potentially got a chaff loan with a silent second or something that's associated with it. It is those more, I would say affluent, but more expensive homes where they just kept refinancing and refinancing. And they took all the money out of it. Those are the ones that we're seeing get underwater. But what we do know is this, the people that lose money on their homes are the ones that have to sell when they're in a bad situation, which isn't where most people are. And that's why, like, we're never, ever going to champion people losing their jobs, which brings us to jobless claims. All right. So we look at jobless claims, and here we are. Again, I'm going to call these self-reported numbers. All right. Like at the end of the day, these numbers don't mean a whole lot to us. Whatever the administration is, they are going to push these up, push these down, depending on what their agenda is. Yes, there's some truth behind these, but like we're not going to put a lot of stock into these. And yet, when we look at it, we do see that the jobless claims is not bad. So they're not bad. This is good. As we're going through, this is what we want to see. It would be super anti-American for us to be rooting for this number to go up. It says the snow impact initially sent jobless claims higher. Why is beyond me. But the data line has fallen recently as the snow impacted melts out of the data pool. This is shaping up to be yet another very interesting week in the housing market, guys. And you guys are living through this. All we have to do is go out there, have as many conversations as possible, and be that real estate economist of choice. But let's look at interest rates. Now, I started with it at 3 months. I wanted us to kind of see what this does look like over 3 months, guys, and it's trending downward. So we're talking 1 quarter worth of data. Now, it's not a full quarter worth of 2026 data, but over December until February, we're looking at 1 quarter worth of data, 3 months. And we can see that this is going lower. And yeah, we do see these peaks and these valleys, which we don't like. We actually don't like to see this peak all the way down to this valley. Like we don't like to see this because this is what gets into our consumers' heads and they think that they can time the market. And we understand that timing the market is not real. Why? Because of X, because of Facebook, because of YouTube, because of Truth Social, because insert whatever here. All it takes is someone to say something that is in some kind of power and it fluctuates. It sends either it scares people or it gives people more hope. And it's all based off of a tweet, which is what 150 characters. Like it's absurd what happens here. As we're going through and we're looking at this, what we do want to see is more like this. Like, I don't like to see this either, but this is okay. This gives our sellers confidence to put their home on the market. This is what tells our buyers that no, we might go a little bit lower, but there's nothing indicating that something crazy is going to happen. We want to see flat levels. We live in the United States of America. We should be able to reasonably forecast out what the cost of money is going to look like over a span of time. So as we're going through, we like this, guys. This looks very, very good. Now we are dropping, right? Both of these are sub 6%. I don't have today's data. I don't think that anything crazy has happened yesterday, outside of what we're hearing out of Mexico at this point, which is super unfortunate. And yet, like as we're going through and look, I don't think there's any news articles that's really going to spike this up to my knowledge. But we'll get more of that data tomorrow when we bring in Mitch and the team to have that conversation. So, guys, everything's looking good. What we just need to be doing right now is having as many conversations as we possibly can because interest rates are going down, inventory's coming up. And so that's going to give your buyers more purchase power.